Hare Krishna, everyone. Welcome to this week's edition of the Hare Krishna Project podcast. This is episode number 166. Yes, 166. We are just 4 episodes away from our 170th episode. I've literally just thought of that. But 166, we've produced 166 episodes over 4 years. And I'm very grateful actually to each of you that tunes in every week. It's great to have you with us. Do not forget, if you're watching this on YouTube and you haven't already, please hit the subscribe button so you can be kept updated about future podcasts and video productions from the Hare Krishna Project. And or if you're watching this on Facebook, which is the other platform where you can watch these podcasts, please do like or follow the Hare Krishna Project Facebook page if you haven't already, so you can be kept updated about future podcasts, video productions, and all the wonderful things we do here at the Hare Krishna Project. As you know, the podcast is just a part of what we do. We also do Hare Krishna festivals, events, school visits, book distribution, all those things that keep me out of trouble. Um, okay. And as you know, one of the things I love about presenting this podcast is I get to meet some fascinating individuals every week. And at some point, I'm going to put together like a map of the world and color code all the countries where I've had the privilege and the honor of interviewing devotees. Because we must have covered so many countries. Okay, and this week we're back to the good old United States of America. That country that for some bizarre reason is always in the UK news, like all the time, because what happens there seems to affect elsewhere. I'm absolutely delighted to welcome our guest this week. It's Baladev Prabhu. Hare Krishna.
Radhe Radhe, Janitai. Nice to be here. Some of us over here are also tired of the United States being in the news, so we're right there with you.
That's something we have in common already.
Yeah.
Baladev Prabhu, Radhe Radhe, Jai Natai. It's great to finally connect with you. We have known of each other for, I think, must be year and a half, 2 years. And we've had a lot of correspondence during that time. And actually, one of the things I'm really grateful for about you is you have been very influential in helping me to secure guests for this podcast, and you've opened the door for me to interview so many people, particularly within your Gaudiya Vaishnav community. So I'm very grateful for that. And in a moment, we'll find out more about your Gaudiya Vaishnav community. So, Baladev, we'll start off with the first question. It's the first question that everyone gets, just to warm us up, if we need warming up, that is. Please tell us a little bit about you and where you are from.
Yeah, thank you. So I am here in Kansas City, Missouri, in the USA. I'm originally from Kansas City, right here in the geographic center of the country. I was born in the mid 80s to a Catholic family. My mom is Catholic, and my father's actually Universalist Unitarian. Though I was raised Catholic, went to Catholic schools, was baptized as an infant, and for the most part, had a pretty standard childhood in the late 80s and early 90s, characterized by playing sports and pop culture and hanging out with my friends. Um, I think one thing that characterizes my internal perspective growing up to a certain extent is this sense of alienation, not in any sort of like troubling way. I guess you could say it was more of just a sense that there was something more. So even though for the most part in my outer life, I was happy to go to school, to play sports, when I got old enough to work jobs, part-time jobs. I think that feeling a sense that society had didn't have everything I needed, wasn't providing all the needs. I didn't have that sort of framework or the vocabulary to think of that as a spiritual thing necessarily, but I knew that there was something more. And what I found when I became a teenager that I felt at the time, and to a certain extent it's true, did sort of meet that need was playing music. So I became a musician. Learned how to play guitar initially when I was 10 years old, but started playing in bands when I was 13. And so now I've been playing in bands for 25 plus years. I still do it, but that provided me with this outlet to be creative, to develop kind of bonds with people that were a little bit more nuanced than the kinds of connections you make sort of in a school setting or, in the mainstream of society. So that was a big thing for me. And for music, in a lot of ways, developed an interest in social justice causes. Um, as we were talking offline beforehand, I've always been interested in, issues of oppression and justice. And music provided a great sort of way to connect with people who were also kind of like-minded to learn more about issues. And, we would organize benefit concerts and things like that. So it was sort of like the center of my universe, sort of like the locus of where everything was happening was our local music scene here. Um, and so I did that throughout high school. When I turned 18, I enrolled in college at Loyola University in Chicago, which is about 8 hours driving from here, 1 hour flying. So it's like, other than St. Louis, the closest like really big hub. It's the third largest city in the United States. And interestingly enough, Loyola University is on the far north side of Chicago, which is also where the Indian community is. And other than going out for Indian food, I didn't really actually connect much with Indian culture when I was there, which I think is just one of the big missed connections in my life. It wasn't until much later when I actually became, connected with Vedanta and Bhakti and things like that. But yeah, I got my English degree and worked for a couple years. And I primarily was working in hospitality and restaurants and things like that. And eventually got tired of being on my feet all the time. So I got a paralegal certificate. I'm not sure if that, profession is, a big thing in the UK and Europe, but it's sort of like a paraprofessional in the legal world. So, sort of what a nurse is to a physician, a paralegal is to an attorney. And so I've been working as a paralegal for the last 17 years or so, and eventually moved back to Kansas City, and I'm still working as a paralegal for a healthcare organization here. And now I'm married with two kids, and sort of externally it looks as though I'm leading a very normal life. But maybe as we'll find as we have this conversation, there are some more, you know, not so normal things.
I always kind of chuckle when people use the word normal within the Hare Krishna movement. Yes, you do come across a little bit normal, which is great. It's very rare to find normal people within the Hare Krishna movement. Thank you for sharing all of that with me. I really appreciated it, and I feel like it was kind of a very quick whistle stop tour through the last 40-ish years of your life. I also appeared in the mid 1980s as well. I think we've had that conversation before. I think we're the same age
Yeah.
or a year out. Uh, um, for me, someone who's interested in religion and religious studies, my ears kind of picked up when you said your dad was a Universalist Unitarian. I'm aware of the Universalists and certainly the Unitarians, but I've not often heard those two terms together, so I'm going to go and read up about it. Um, but I can
Yeah,
imagine it's kind of a very liberal form of Christianity, possibly.
it's actually not even really very Christian, to be honest with you. But coming from the Unitarian tradition, that idea that the Godhead is one single being rather than the Trinity, the Trinitarian idea being the more kind of pervasive Christian idea. I think that the Universalist Church and the Unitarian Church were two different bodies in the United States, maybe in the UK, I'm not sure. Eventually they merged, and their theology has become more and more progressive over the years and less dogmatic. So having that parent in the household who had an open mind was really nice because Roman Catholicism can be pretty rigid. I don't think I don't think that's a shocking statement to anyone. Though I will say that the parish that I grew up in and the school system, especially my kindergarten through eighth grade years, it was very much influenced by progressive Catholicism and to a certain extent by like liberation theology. which was very pervasive in the 80s and 90s, especially in Latin America. And my mother's church has a sister parish in San Salvador, El Salvador, which experienced a number of years of conflict in which the Catholic Church was actually aligned with the peasants and the workers against an authoritarian regime. So that was sort of an interesting context to grow up in, especially in the era of John Paul II, which I'm not an expert on Catholicism, especially these days, but there were some tensions there that were interesting to observe.
Thank you for sharing that with us. Because one of the kind of additional questions I have for guests, which you've already answered, is did you have a religious upbringing? And you did, and you've talked about Catholicism and your being raised in that community, and that kind of helps set the scene, I guess, for the next question which is how did you discover Krishna consciousness? How did you meet the devotees?
Yeah, they've been in Kansas City since at least the mid 90s. I became aware of them in the late 90s. I would have been about 12 or 13 years old. My friends and I would go out and we'd skateboard and we'd hang out, just do the things the kids do. And they would be out on the street, actually pretty close to my parents' neighborhood, so it was pretty easy to run into them. And interestingly, they didn't try and sell us anything. They didn't try and distribute books to us, but they would actually take the time to talk to us. At that point in my life, I was not so open to adopting a totally new perspective or theology or in particular lifestyle at that point. But it did resonate with me that they were willing to kind of look us in the eye, even though we were 12, 13-year-old kids, and have serious conversations with us. Um, and, when I was in high school, a place where we would go to see movies and socialize, they would often show up on Friday nights and do Harinam, which definitely was a sight to see in this, very American commercial kind of environment. People out dressed up to go to the Cheesecake Factory and to see movies and things like that. And you see the devotees come in and kurta and dhotis and playing kartals and chanting. And so I would join in with them and, just have fun chanting. But I didn't really have a serious exploration of Gaudiya Vaishnavism until my mid 20s. As I mentioned, I went to college so close to the Chicago Temple, and I knew people who would go over there for the Sunday feast. It's kind of an iconic thing for college kids to do is like to get a really great free meal and, has the added benefit that it's spiritualized by being offered to the deities. I never went to the temple when I lived there. It was when I moved back here and started doing more like sort of independent study after becoming interested in comparative religion and being convinced that there's kind of more to life than the gross material aspect of things. Um, yeah, actually, I had read most of Bhagavad Gita as it is, and all of the science of self-realization by the time I went to my first program. So after having read those books, I just kind of decided, okay, it's a little bit scary, but I'm going to go there by myself and just check it out. And so I wandered into the Kansas City Temple one Sunday. I believe it was in the fall of 2010. And it was, not a festival. It wasn't a big occasion. I'd written ahead and said, hey, is it okay for, me to just show up? And they said, of course, anytime, 24 hours a day, you can come over. So I decided to pop in, and there were probably only like 10 people there, but the kirtan was ecstatic. The aesthetics, I'd never seen anything quite like that. The deities there are Gaura, and there were probably five brahmacharis and one sannyasi and a couple members of the local Indian community there. And they were just so, entranced by the kirtan and by the bhajan. And, the katha, obviously on Bhagavad Gita, listening to that, I would read it, but hearing, the purports on the purports, that was sort of like next level. And I was like, this is such a vast tradition. It's something that could keep me busy for a lifetime. So I started going deeper at that point back in 2010, early 2011.
And that was at the local ISKCON temple.
That's right. Yeah, Rupanuga
Ah,
Vedic College.
yeah, yeah. And then how long were you kind of involved with that temple, with that community?
Yeah, so I never received Diksha in ISKCON. I never lived at the ashram. Actually, at that point, I by the time I was really a regular attendee, Sunday feasts, I was already engaged to be married. So, I was kind of already an adult living a householder life. But I attended programs there for about 2 years. But concurrent to that, I started exploring, a little bit beyond just sort of mainline ISKCON. In particular, I felt like, this is a beautiful tradition. I love kirtan, I love japa, I love all these things. Some of the social attitudes didn't necessarily resonate with me so much. So I was like, are there other branches of this tradition that have different perspectives on, things like gay relationships and things like that, which, kind of at that point in my life, I was like, I'm not really going to entertain homophobia at all. And I'm not implying that, there was widespread homophobia in ISKCON or in the Kansas City Temple, but it just didn't seem like the attitudes were 100% aligned. And so I somehow, I think it was probably just through some online research, became aware of Tripurari Swami, who's a California-based sannyasi, a disciple of both A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada and Sridhar Maharaj. And I was taken away with his sort of, well, both his erudite speech and writing, and also just his like vibe, I guess you could say. He seemed like a contemporary kind of person doing a traditional thing. And so I found him online and I wrote in his Sevak at the time, wrote back and said, well, where are you located? I said, I'm in Kansas City, Missouri. And he's like, no way. As a matter of fact, there's a farm community 45 minutes away from you. And there are two disciples there. And I'd heard that there was a farm community. I'd never been, but they provided the contact information. And I wrote, it's a beautiful, beautiful compound in Baldwin City, Kansas, with, I guess, 4 households now. You actually, a couple years back, interviewed Indranuja Das from Scotland, and he lives out there. Tripurari Swami's people connected me with him, and I wrote to him, and he said, "Come on out, come on out next weekend." Okay, I'll come out, and I felt like the community there. There were probably 25 people at a home program in rural Kansas, and that in and of itself is kind of a shocker. Um, and I felt like he really embraced me. He provided me some books at that time. He gave me a copy of Tripurari Swami's Bhagavad Gita. It's called Bhagavad Gita. I believe it's Feeling and Philosophy, which is still a text that I return to. His translations are great, and his purports are good, kind of supplement to the ISKCON translations. And so I was involved with Bhaktivan. I'd still go to the Kansas City Temple occasionally, but that was sort of my main location for another 2 years or so. Yeah, so that kind of brings us up to about 2014. And around that time, I sort of was feeling to some transformation. I was feeling like a little bit like I wasn't ready for something so defined, I guess you could say. I felt like maybe it was a lack of shraddha or something. I just couldn't see the like exclusivity of Radha Krishna Bhakti at that time, which it's kind of painful to say nowadays, but I felt the need to kind of seek something out that was a little bit more universal and a little bit less defined. And so I still also felt very at home with like Vedantic traditions and practices and things like that. So at that point, I was exploring some other groups, and eventually, much closer to me geographically, I ended up being a member of our Vedanta society here for 6 years. I studied Vedanta with a teacher from St. Louis. Well, he's originally from East Bengal, and then by way of India, ended up in St. Louis. His name is Swami Chaitanyananda. He's very widely known in West Bengal and Bangladesh, and to a certain extent in the English-speaking, like scholarly Vedanta world. Yeah, and I was his student for 6 years and learned so much about just sort of the greater like Vedantic culture.
Mm, mm,
He would address the Vedas, the Upanishads, the Gita, the Bhagavatam from a very I don't know, a very unique way. That tradition is the larger like RamaKrishna tradition, if you're familiar with that at all. Which I know there have been some tensions with Vaishnavas and the RamaKrishna order over the years, but I think in Bengal and places like that, and in the Bengali community here, a lot of people are actually sort of interested in and involved with both. But I gained a lot from that experience, and actually, I served on the board of directors for the Vedanta Society here for a year or two, and I'm still in touch with many of those people. But oddly, the pendulum kind of swung back the other way in 2020 or so, and I felt kind of again the need to have something more defined and more prescribed, and like more systematic, and that's kind of when I found myself re-exploring Gaudiya Vaishnavism.
mm. I I'm finding your story fascinating. I mean, for me, it just kind of clarifies and confirms that spiritual life isn't always necessarily in one straight line where you can see where you're going. Actually, spiritual life can be like this, up and down, and you want to explore things and you want to try different things. And sometimes you just wake up thinking, I want to try something new. I want to try something different. I mean, as far as I'm aware, I mean, I haven't asked every single guest about their entire background, 166 times, but I think you're the first person I've interviewed that has some background with the Vedanta Society or the wider uh, uh, Ramakrishna
Yeah,
mission, isn't
Krishna.
it? I did learn about the Ramakrishna mission at school. I did my A-level Hinduism, and I remember it. And during my first trip to India in 2013, in New Delhi, I did go and briefly visit the Ramakripa Mission Center. My A-level Hinduism was about, Swami Vivekananda and the World Parliament of Religions in 1893 or something when he
Yeah.
gave the famous speech. So yeah, and I'm also aware. I think some historians might correct me, but some of the traits of the Ramakripa mission were taken into the into the create for the Gaudiya Mat. So when the Gaudiya Mat was created in 1920 by Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur, he did take some of the ideas from the Ramakrishna mission in the formation of the Gaudiya Mat. I think particularly around the sannyas dress is the one that springs to mind, because originally the wearing of saffron wasn't in the original Gaudiya Vaishnava tradition, in the
That's right.
traditional lines. And that was
Yeah,
kind of something taken from the Krishna mission.
I do believe they had a lot of clout in Bengal in the years after Swami Vivekananda. And so it's not surprising that Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur would see something to learn or something to adopt or appropriate from the Ramakrishna mission. Just the connection to the independence movement was pretty strong as well. So yeah, I think that there were some advantages in adopting the sannyas ashram.
Yeah, yeah. And also thank you for telling us about your involvement with the Sri Chaitanya Sangha from Tripura Swami, who I have interviewed on this podcast before, and I have met him. And I've interviewed a number of his followers, and I do remember the interview with the devotee that you've just mentioned about 2 years ago. A wonderful Scottish man. Yeah, I remember that. And it was actually you that arranged that interview. It's all now coming back to me. You've probably arranged about 5 or 6 interviews for me over the years, which I'm
I
very
have more
grateful for.
ideas for you. I'll share
Yeah,
them later.
send them over. Send them over. and it's kind of what you've kind of given us a whistle stop tour of the last 15 years. Now we're in 2025, and you are a committed disciple and follower of Nityagopal Goswami Prabhupada. And I've had the great privilege of interviewing a number of followers of Nityananda Goswami Prabhupada over the years. Can you tell us a bit about him? What inspired you to follow him and take shelter of him?
Absolutely. Yeah. So my Srila Gurudev, Nityagopal Goswami Prabhupada, I became aware of him in probably 2020 or 2021. And that's sort of where it's a natural transition where I left off that sort of sequence from finding myself at the end of this tenure with the Vedanta Society and wanting to find something with more structure, turning back towards Gaudiya Vaishnavism at that time. And so I mean, I explored a number of other things, but ultimately concluded that, from a Vedantic perspective, the Vedanta of Achinta Bheda Bheda and the practices of Sankirtan and Japa Yoga, those were the things that I wanted to be the foundation of my spiritual practice. And one teacher that I was interested in and aware of at the time was Satyanarayan Das Babaji of the Jiva Institute in Vrindavan. And I was corresponding with his assistant for a while. Her name is Malati Manjari Devi Dasi. And she was, being incredibly helpful, giving me recommendations on books to read, lectures to listen to, and things like that. And really explained a lot to me at that time in 2020, 2021 about some of the unique aspects of traditional Gaudiya Vaishnavism in contrast to the Saraswat line and the innovations of Bhakti Siddhanta and his followers. And I was kind of swept away with this idea of Raganuga Bhakti. I'd heard of Raganuga Bhakti, but I hadn't become aware of any teacher that said, I will teach you Raganuga Bhakti. And I just asked her, like, I'm not in a position to travel to India at this point. Like, are you aware of any teachers of traditional Gaudiya Vaishnavism that travel to the West? And she named three, though I think two of them were based in India with just many Western followers. So the thought was maybe I'd develop some connections. But I saw Nityagopal Goswami Prabhupada, and then I looked him up and I saw he was in the United States just last year. He goes to the UK, he goes to the US, he goes to South America. I was like, this actually might be a practical connection to make. I might be able to, I might be able to meet him in the flesh. And I just started exploring more and more about him, just from the outside without necessarily making any formal inquiry. And I was like, he's a disciple of Nityananda Prabhu. Like, is that possible? We were talking earlier. It's kind of mind-boggling that this many generations later, his disciples are still spreading the Sankirtan movement. But I ultimately resolved that I wanted to reach out to him, but didn't know how other than sending like a direct message. And I thought that might be a little bit too forward. So I found a website dedicated to the Nityananda line, both to Nityagopal Prabhu and his brother, Srila Premgopal Goswami Prabhupada, and learned a lot from there, but I also noticed that there was contact information on there. So I sent an email, just kind of very vague, amorphous inquiry, like, how do I learn more? And just a couple of hours later, I got an email back from Lalita, who you've also interviewed a couple years back. And Lalita said, you have some questions, let's address those. So we had a conversation, and she taught me so many things, nothing that's necessarily like hidden, but things that are obscured by kind of the greater tradition. In particular, just the details of Nityananda's life and his mission and, his descendants, because we have generations of his descendants to learn from as well. And she recommended that I read a book called The Nityananda Vamsha Vishtar, which is by Srila Vrindavan Das Thakur. which it's hagiography of Nityananda Prabhu, but also his son Birchandra Goswami. And Birchandra Goswami is believed to be, not just the son of Nityananda Prabhu, but also an expansion of Gauranga Mahaprabhu. And I recommend that book to everyone I meet who is interested in the Nityananda Vamsh. I think it's a great source to learn about, just sort of the mood, the sort of avadut attitude that you see in the Nityananda line, and it only increased my resolve to make this connection. And not too long after chatting with Lolita for the first time and getting some recommendations and some initial insight on the branch of the tradition, she said, "Well, pose this question to Baba." And she gave me his WhatsApp number, and I reached out to him, and shockingly, he responded to me in just a matter of hours, and he responded to my follow-up questions, and he said, I'll be coming to the US next summer, so let's have a conversation in person. And this was 2022. We tried to schedule him in Kansas City at that time, but it didn't work out because of some changes to his itinerary. So I went and saw him in Detroit, and was just blown away by the Bengali hospitality, and seeing Baba speak to the Kali temple there. Just probably 300 people packed into a small temple, hearing his Bengali katha. And when I went up there, he did give me diksha and some initial instructions, with the thought, I'll see you next summer, and we'll go further at that point. And yeah, since then, in August of 2022, I've been a very committed and blessed follower of Nityagopal Prabhupada, and I'm very grateful to him.
I love how you can just send a WhatsApp message to your guru. That must be a wonderful feeling, that a really close, personal, intimate connection, direct connection is a better word. I mean, because so many disciples, followers, students of their gurus won't. It's not possible to have such a direct level of contact. So I think you're very fortunate in that way.
Absolutely. And when he stayed with me the following year, anytime I needed to ask him a question, or let him know it was time for a prashad or something, I'd find that he was on his phone responding to WhatsApp messages to disciples all over the world. And interestingly, he's actually going to Japan later this month. So I know that this will air probably next week sometime. But if there are devotees in Japan who are interested in meeting with him, the opportunity is finally here. So yeah.
Yeah, yeah, wonderful. And I know he has been to the UK a few times, and I did miss him in the sense that I was always aware of his existence. My book came out 4 years ago about the diversity of the movement in Britain, and he was mentioned and he was featured in it. And then about a year later, I interviewed Lalita, who, and around that time he was also in the UK, and I kind of missed him, but I'm kind of determined, or I am determined to meet him next time he's in the UK, to meet him in person, because I think that would be a wonderful experience. And I try and meet so many devotees from so many mats and so many sanghas because it's a great learning experience. We can all learn something from each other. I'm not a big fan of this kind of institutional tribalistic approach to Krishna consciousness because actually it's not really part of the Gaudiya Vaishnava tradition.
Not at all. Yeah, I mean, our tradition is non-sectarian, and yeah, it is disconcerting when we see sectarian tendencies arise, even when they're within the family, as you could say. And so I'm very much of the same minds that it's good to have dialogue, and it's not that we want to brush aside differences, especially when they're real differences or substantive differences. But that doesn't mean that we can't have dialogue, or that we can't necessarily learn something. So, as we mentioned earlier, the project you have, I'm a huge fan of, and I really appreciate that you're willing to invite in different voices, some that you may not necessarily agree with, but you just because you feel like there's value in those voices being heard.
Thank you for that. And one of the things I'd like to do, if when I get around to it, is to look at the 166 guests and maybe put together a map or a chart showing which mats or sanghas they're from. I mean, in the UK, we identified 20 different mats in our research, and some mats are not in the UK that didn't get a mention. And what I like to do is over the 4 years, how many guests have appeared on this podcast that are from a range of mats, and it would probably be well over 25 or 30. Um, and and there's still some mats and some sanghas I've not interviewed devotees from, and they're kind of on the list to kind of reach out to. One thing I just want you to confirm, and I know this, but some of our viewers and listeners may not know this, is that Nityagopal Goswami Prabhupada is actually a biological descendant of Nityananda Prabhu, isn't he?
That is correct. Yes. He's the 14th generation descendant, and his brother, Srila Premgopal Goswami, also is his descendant. And then his son, Govinda Gopal Goswami, 15th generation. So, we're excited that this lineage is alive and well. And, from our perspective as devotees of the Nityananda Vamsh, it's an eternal lineage because Nityananda Prabhu is the second person of the Panchatattva. And yeah, it's interesting. I was taken aback when I learned that Nityananda Prabhu has descendants, and many of them, very many. Our branch isn't the only branch of his family that's still extant. So there are others out there. And then also, there are branches of the Nityananda tree that are Babaji in orientation. So, like Anantadas Babaji, the Mahant of Radhakund, was was in the Nityananda Parivar, in the line of Nityananda, not hereditary line, but many. Yeah, there are many out there, and we're blessed in our Sangha here in the US and Canada that we have great association with disciples of Srila Anantadas Babaji because he's left behind so much great work for us to study. And I can't recommend his work enough to those interested in Gaudiya Vaishnavism.
He has a few disciples in the UK, which is where I am now. Two of which are good friends of mine in the very north of Scotland, or probably not that north, but quite north in my opinion. And Yeah, I know them. And also, a frequent visitor to the UK is Sri Raman Bahari Das Babaji, who has a large following, I would say, outside of the Sarasvat line, still in the Gaudiya tradition. He has a big following in the UK. I mean, followers, maybe close to 100. I mean,
Oh,
actually
wow.
initiated disciples 30 or 40, which is more than some ISKCON gurus in the UK
That's
anyway.
amazing. I know they have a big presence in Glastonbury. Is that
Yeah,
right? Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, I'd love to visit at some point. I'm not very familiar with him, but I was told that my Gurudev and he are very respectful towards one another. So I believe they're aware of each other and respectful. So I perhaps on one of Baba's visits in the future, it's a site he could visit. Yeah.
Wonderful, wonderful. Okay. Um, Baladev, what makes the Nityananda Vamsa or Vamsha different, maybe in terms of philosophy or practice from the Gaudiya groups in the Sarasvat line? Because most of our viewers and listeners will be from the Sarasvat line. So if some of our viewers and listeners don't understand what I mean by that, because actually it's not a household term, Sarasvat line, it's all those groups and mats that are offshoots from the original Gaudiya mat. So ISKCON, the Sri Chaitanya Sarasvat mat, International Pure Bhakti Yoga Society, Sri Gopinath Gaudiya Mat, the Radha Kripa Mission, Bhaktivedanta Lives and Sound Society. Most of us listening, watching, will be in the Sarasvat line. So, Baladev, kind of explain to us in your wonderful family, how is it different from the Sarasvat line?
Absolutely. It's a great question. And I would preface it by saying that when I saw my Gurudev last summer, one of the members of our Sangha asked a question about A.C. Bhaktivedanta Srila Prabhupada, and Baba raised his finger and he said, none of you would be here without Bhaktivedanta. None of you would be here. All of us Westerners in the room, all of us had come, in a roundabout way to his shelter. And I was very that was very impressive to me that he was aware that we owed a debt to Bhaktivedanta. Of course, there are differences, and my Guru Bhai Dalji did an excellent job a couple weeks back on your show of spotlighting a couple of those. So anything I could say can only be a supplement to what he said. One thing he mentioned in terms of mantras, the Panchatattva mantra that your listeners, most of them will be familiar with. Ours is different. And that goes Sri Gauranga Nityananda Sri Advaita Chandra Gadadhara Shiva Sadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. And I had never heard that mantra until my initiation day. I've been chanting the same Panchatattva mantra as up until that very day. And so obviously I had a question about that mantra, why is it this and not this? And there's a substantive, philosophical answer to that question. And that is in our tradition, we place more emphasis on Gauranga Mahaprabhu than Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. A lot of that is because ours is a householder tradition primarily. And so, even on my shrine upstairs, the picture of Mahaprabhu that I have is with the long flowing hair. And many devotees in the Saraswat line probably have similar pictures, and we actually at our Kansas City temple here have a similar picture. But we tend not to worship the image of Chaitanya, this sannyasi with the shaved head and a sikha. Obviously, same Lord, we worship the same, it's the same personality. But there's something kind of heartbreaking about Chaitanya accepting sannyas to us. And it was Nityananda actually who broke his sannyas danda, So we worship Gauranga as our, as one of our ishtas. So that's one principal difference. You alluded earlier to the introduction of sannyas by Bhaktisiddhanta. And Triparari Swami actually, as an aside, uses the term the Bhaktivinoda Parivar to refer to the Saraswat line. And I really like that term, as a parivar. But yeah, in our tradition, we have Goswamis and we have Babajis, but no sannyasis. So that's another sort of difference in the culture of the Nityananda line.
That's just I personally just find that quite interesting and fascinating, and it does now remind me of sometimes my brain needs triggering as to what people have told me, but it reminds me of the conversation I had with your god sister Lalita a couple of years ago that in the Nityananda Vamsha that there's that sannyas doesn't exist. So your Gurudev is not a sannyasi, is he, in the way that others understand sannyas? And now because you've said that, I now recognize the difference between Gauranga Mahaprabhu and Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. And you just said something that kind of triggered something in my head, that Chaitanya Mahaprabhu taking sannyas is a heartbreaking thought. Um, yeah, I'm intrigued by that. And
It's a
that's actually quite
heartbreaking
a
Leela
key
in some
difference.
ways.
That's quite a
Yeah.
key difference, isn't it? Sannyas as an ashram doesn't exist in the Nityananda Vamsa. Yeah.
That's right. Yeah. I mean, I suppose like from a Vedic point of view, all of the ashrams are there, from brahmachari to sannyas, but we don't have like a formal taking of sannyas, and wearing saffron and walking with the danda. Um, yeah, that was something introduced by Bhakti Siddhanta, and it's very pervasive nowadays, obviously throughout the world to see the ISKCON sannyasis. But yeah, it's Babajis and Goswamis in the traditional lines.
Mhm.
And also, another tradition, which I'm not sure if Daji mentioned or not, he may have, but the tradition of the Goswami receiving Diksha from his mother rather than from his father, who's the biological descendant.
Wow, he didn't say
Yeah,
that, and I'm fascinated by that. I'm fascinated by that.
yeah. It's a really beautiful thing. And actually, Daji did mention that Govinda Gopal Prabhu was married last fall. His wedding festival took place, I believe, in October. And some of my god siblings had the privilege of going. But there's part of the ceremony that involves his new wife being empowered with Janava Shakti. So that basically empowers her to give initiation to any children that she may have with Govinda Gopal. So yeah, I know that there have been many debates about female Diksha gurus, but for a line that goes back to Janava Ma, we don't see any problem with female Diksha gurus.
Yeah, unfortunately, I'm coming off the fence now. Unfortunately, it's still a bit of an issue in the Sarasvat line or the Bhaktivinoda Parivar. I like that name. Yeah, you know the role of women and whether women can um, be Diksha gurus. And actually, in your Sampradaya, Mat Sangha, it's never been an issue because it's always existed. And I haven't quite heard it this way in the sense that Goswamis always received Diksha from their mother. Um,
In our line, they do. I can't say about other lines necessarily because there are other hereditary lines out there that may handle it differently, but that is the
why is that
tradition.
out of interest? Well, just why do they receive Diksha from their mother rather than their father?
That's a good question. And so my answer could only be speculation because I've never asked that directly. But you know, our line it originates not just with Nityananda, but with
Hmm.
Janava Didi. So it originates with a female Diksha guru, and I've heard others say that you know in the years after Mahaprabhu's his Leela on Earth that Janava Devi was really seen by many as the leader of the Gaudiya Sampradaya. I don't know if that's a statement that is unequivocal because obviously there were great personalities out there, you know, all of the Goswamis of Vrindavan, others from the Panchatattva, but our line starts with her, and so you know she's given Diksha to Bir Chandra Goswami, and then the tradition has kept up since then.
I mean, again, just speculation. I've just got an idea. Could it also be linked to um, the importance of female energy, the role of women, showing the importance of motherhood? You know, I mean, the thought. I mean, it's not similar, but you know, in Orthodox Judaism, you know, you're only Jewish if your mother's Jewish. It's you know, if uh, yeah, and that's the first comparison that came to my head.
It
Is
very
that kind
well
of a
could.
similarity, maybe?
It very well could. I mean, there's definitely a larger element of the Gaudiya Vaishnav Sampradaya in its totality, placing more emphasis on Shakti than some of the other, even Raj Bhakti Sampradayas. Um, and I think that that's just perhaps because of the Bengali roots of the Gaudiya Sampradaya, where, you know, worship of the Divine Mother is so pervasive in Bengal that, you know, the Gaudiya Vaishnavas I mean, there are other sampradayas that are rag sampradayas definitely place emphasis on Shakti as well. But from my vantage point, it seems that the Gaudiya Sampradaya places the most emphasis on Shakti. So, you know, our desire to be manjaris of Radharani.
Mm.
So the feminine energy is very present.
Mm. And the Nityananda Vamsa in seems to be growing. I mean, in terms of, or it seems to be attracting Westerners. Maybe at not a speed or the same level as other groups, because as your wonderful godmother Dalji explained to me a while ago, who was a previous guest, the kind of preaching. Or outreach isn't necessarily done in the same way as it is in the Sarasvat line, but certainly I've noticed that the Nityagopal Goswami Prabhupada himself is attracting quite a lot of Western followers. Why do
It's
you think that
true.
is?
You know, uh, much of it must just have to do with Nityagopal Prabhupada and just who he is. That must be a big part of it. Whenever I had a question for him, the answers that I got were so clear and crystallized and presented in this beautiful Bengali way, you know. But if I were to do further research on it, I'd find tons of shastric support for the answers. So some of it must just be who he is. But as you mentioned earlier, other teachers within the same branch are also attracting followers, and I think that that's because the the branch of the tree, this Nityananda line and the Nityananda Vamsh as a whole no longer see themselves just as located in Bharat. They see the whole world, and Bengalis are all over the world. As I mentioned earlier, Baba is going to Japan in just a few weeks, which is a place that my wife's side we have some family connections to. So hopefully we'll be able to visit Japan and see, my Gurudeva in Japan at some point. But yeah, even though it is primarily like bhajan and Nandi, like kind of, more about personal practice than about the Sankirtan in the street necessarily, like you see in like ISKCON and other branches. There is definitely still a particular kind of outreach. Our numbers aren't so much that we could, overwhelm any sort of public place, but we're out there in the wild to an extent that, if somebody's interested, we're easy to find at this point. And once you're easy to find, people start showing up. I don't go to our ISKCON temple here and start talking to people about, hey, you should come over here and, join this and, stop doing what you're doing. I don't want to disrupt anybody's, flow or their practice or whatever. But, with social media giving us the opportunity to kind of like show who we are, people now see that and they're able to say, like, maybe I should ask this guy a question. Maybe I should find out a little bit more about this. So I don't know, just some random thoughts on why the numbers may be growing.
Do you go to your local ISKCON temple sometimes?
Occasionally, I was actually there yesterday for Ram Navami and
Mm.
took my kids, and I just love the community there, and I feel very welcome. I show up, as Daji mentioned, our TLOC is somewhat different. Occasionally, people ask me questions, but nobody ever, gives me any sort of pushback or makes me feel less than welcome.
Mm. And that's, I mean, in my opinion, that's the way it should be. You shouldn't
Yeah,
feel excluded or be excluded because you're following a slightly different path or sampradaya or mat, and I'm pleased that your local ISKCON temple welcomes you and includes you and serves you prasadam and allows you to take part in kirtan. That isn't unfortunately always the case.
it's true.
So I actually think you're quite lucky.
Oh, I feel very blessed. Even in the years when I like, was doing another thing, if I pop in, people always made me feel welcome. Yeah. And my comings and goings in that sort of world don't really have anything to do with a lack of hospitality or anything like that. It's just sort of in the directions that I've been pulled.
Mm, mm.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you for that. Baladev, what are your thoughts on the current condition of the global, worldwide Hare Krishna community? And how do you think we can attract more people to the path of bhakti?
It's a great question. And, in many ways, I've always lived sort of since I came to the movement on the fringes. So I've never been at ground zero for, the movement with a capital M. So I'm sure that I have a somewhat different perspective than many people who you've asked the same question to in the past. I mean, the world right now is it's it's no secret. It's not in a great state. You know, our Shastras tell us we have hundreds of thousands of years left of Kali Yuga. So I mean, I personally think that the most important thing that we can do is to do our bhajan as best as we can and with as much dedication as we can and render service as best as we can. And if we can do anything more on top of that, then, wonderful. I don't know. I mean, I think that there will always be ebbs and flows in society's ability to be receptive to our message. I think right now we do have an interesting opportunity to get our message out there. I personally question if some of the traditional means of getting the message out are the best way. I don't know if I ever really would have been swept up, attracted to, someone just selling me a book on the street, to be honest. And I'm not knocking that service at all because, it's a great thing that many devotees find to be very fulfilling. And it does introduce some people to the message. I think, like that sort of initial conversation I had with a devotee, on a park bench, like that's the kind of thing, like the face to face, person to person kind of connection where you're not necessarily entering the conversation with an ulterior motive of getting someone to be this or be that, but really our goal should be to help them become who they really are, you know? So that might not mean they look like us or dress like us or practice like us, but getting them to understand that, if you want to look further, there's more. If you want to, participate, we're here. And that kind of attitude of inclusion is, I believe, more effective than heavy-handed approaches. So I think that hopefully that attitude will become more pervasive. I think that it is, to be honest. People aren't out in public the way they used to post-pandemic. I mean, it's somewhat coming back, but for the most part, people are at home, people are reading, people are online. They get together with people they know already. People are pretty siloed and cloistered. And so things like podcasts, like what you're doing here, or just being available if somebody's curious, I think are the best things we can do.
And just kind of coming alongside people, being amongst people in the community, trying to connect with, real, whatever we mean by real, normal, everyday people, in the workplace, at the local community group. And I'm certainly, I mean, my background's Methodist Christianity, which is non-conformist Protestant, basically, where really there's a focus on just serving the community, not trying to preach in that kind of overt way where you're going to have to follow Jesus or go to hell. It's more about how can we just serve people. Very similar to the Salvation Army. We just want to make a difference because we believe that God loves everyone and we just want to share the love of God. And actually, we don't want anything in return. Of course, if you choose to make a spiritual commitment yourself, that's a bonus. But we do it because we want to serve. And I mean, the Jehovah's Witnesses call it witnessing. We're going to witness, But yeah, I agree with you. I agree with you. And I would say we need to show that devotees are somewhat average, everyday people who have political views and social views. I remember years ago having a conversation with a devotee about the importance of voting. And I said, actually, I don't really care who you vote for, but you should vote because I'm trying to practice bhakti myself. I chant the Hare Krishna Maha Mantra and I have philosophical spiritual views that are rooted in Gaudiya Vaishnavism. But I also want my local roads to be in a good condition. I want good local libraries. I want good local schools for my nephews. I want my rubbish to be collected, So I might have a view on which political parties will do those things better or not so good. And I'm a devotee that has an interest in all aspects of life.
Yeah, I'm 100% agree. I mean, you can have different perspectives as to how to get to those final goals. And that's really the process that we should be engaging in civic life. But if we want to get people to sort of let that spiritual seed germinate, they have to have certain material conditions met first. Otherwise, you're in fight or flight mode. You're in a position where you're worried about, basic human survival. And so I do find it kind of heartbreaking when I hear devotees kind of dismiss concern with some of the really troubling things occurring in the world today because, they're just, they're meat eaters. That, of course, this is going to happen. Explaining it all in a karmic way. Because I just worry, like, what kind of karma are we creating with our callous attitude? So we should be empathetic, and we should, be involved. We can, like you said, we can
Yeah, well, I mean,
have different perspectives, but we need to be involved.
Parampara, sorry, Paramatma, I've had one of those days today. Paramatma, Krishna exists in the hearts of all. Krishna exists in every
Right.
living entity, not just in those that chant Hare Krishna, not just those that are of Indian body, not just those that are in male bodies. Krishna exists in the hearts of all. It says that in the Bhagavad Gita. So ultimately, we should be serving everyone as if we're serving Krishna, serving the Lord. It's great to meet a like-minded devotee. I certainly like your approach to doing things. Baladev, if listeners and viewers to this podcast want to find out more about the Nityananda Vamsa or particularly Nityagopal Goswami Prabhupada, how might they go about doing that?
It's a good question. I mean, it may depend to a certain degree on like where you're physically located, but we are online. I mean, I'd be happy for anyone to reach out to me directly. I'm on Facebook under my birth name, Ben Summers. So you'll see a picture of me in my profile with my Gurudev. And you're welcome. Anyone who's interested is welcome to message me there. We do meet on WhatsApp. I'm sorry, on Zoom weekly for readings. Currently, we're reading Chaitanya Bhagavat right now. And those who are seriously interested in, the Nityananda line, we're happy to welcome you into our WhatsApp chat and the meetings on a weekly basis. So I think, yeah, I mean, if people want to reach out directly, that's probably the best way to go. Of course, if you have any connections locally, just talk to people in person. If you see somebody who has the tilak with the bamboo leaf kind of triangle right here, it's a safe bet that they're Nityananda devotees. And I can guarantee that they'll be happy to talk to you about Lord Nityananda.
Mm, mm. Wonderful. Yeah, I'm really pleased to hear that. Okay, and I certainly remember talking to Dalji a couple of months ago or 2 months ago, a godbrother of yours, that your Gurudev has written at least one book, hasn't he? I think at least one. Just
That's
remind us
right.
what the book is and what it's about.
Yes, it's called Bhakti Katha, and it is a collection of lectures that Nityagopal Prabhupada delivered on Facebook Live, oddly enough, right when the pandemic started. So they range from March of 2020 to, I want to say, mid to late summer of 2020. In upcoming versions, I think that it will include some lectures he gave on a later visit to Florida, but it very systematically goes through the practice of bhakti, the 64 limbs and things like that. And he, in his very beautiful way of articulating things in his beautiful Bengali inflected English, explains to us how we as Westerners can practice. And it's actually available on Amazon. There should be another edition coming out in the next couple of months. I believe my god siblings are working on that, and I'm excited to get my hands on the new version.
Great. Yeah. Well, when the new version is available, please let me know because I would love to buy a
Absolutely.
copy. I try to keep a broad collection of books which are over here from a range of teachers and guides and people that are inspiring. And I want to be well read. I want to always keep that kind of open mind in the Gaudiya Vaishnava tradition. I know that the Gaudiya Vaishnava tradition is my home. And I'm committed to following A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada. But I want to learn about others. I want to understand what makes you tick. Why do you follow the path that you follow? And I want to try and have an open mind to try and understand that. So I will definitely get a copy. And I have read other books from other gurus in the Nityananda Vamsa as well.
Definitely. Srila Premgopal Goswami has a number of books out that his disciples have made available to the public, and those are a great resource as well. Yeah.
Great. Thank you, Baladev. Okay. We've had a fantastic discussion today. I love how you you give very kind of concise answers. And I like kind of that sharp approach to answering questions. I mean, I'm not going to name anyone, but over the last 4 years, if I ask someone about their background, you hear everything.
Well, hopefully it was coherent.
It was great actually,
Yeah.
and I like very concise podcasts because it gives people a kind of a bite-sized chunk about you and your life and what inspires you. So, thank you for giving us a bite-sized chunk today. Um, it's been
Thank you for
wonderful.
the opportunity and for facilitating such a fun discussion.
Thank you, Baladev. Okay, I'm going to say goodbye to the viewers at home, but I was going to say stay on the line. It's like a talk show,
Yeah.
isn't it? Stay on the line. We'll talk about your problems after when we stop recording. So I'm very grateful to Baladev Prabhu for being our 166th guest on the Hare Krishna Project podcast. I'm pleased that I finally persuaded him to appear as a guest himself. And actually, he's helped me secure 5 or 6 guests in the past. So I'm very grateful to, it's like an unofficial assistant.
Oh, my pleasure.
Thank you. So I'm very grateful to him. As always, to everyone viewing and watching, do not forget if you're watching this on YouTube and you haven't already, please hit the subscribe button if you haven't done it. And if you're watching this on Facebook, please do like or follow the Hare Krishna Project Facebook page. Those are the 2 ways you can watch these podcasts to hear what our guests are saying. And do not forget as well, I love to receive constructive feedback. You are allowed to have your own opinion, believe it or not. So I'd love to hear from you, but make it constructive. What things today, as Baladev said, that you're not so keen on or you are keen on. You are allowed to have your own opinion. I often joke that certainly I was going to say within ISKCON then, but in lots of groups, there's that thing about being offended. You can't ask that question because it's very offensive.
You
Well,
can't get
you
an
can ask,
answer.
yeah, yeah, and but you can ask those constructive questions here. Um, Great. So until next week, I'll see you all soon. Thank you. Hare Krishna.
Anytime.